Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to what is the second corporate housing EURA dedicated event, one that we were originally hoping to be running through with you all in sunny Seville, but obviously for numerous reasons which we're all aware that can't happen, but hopefully we're going to have an exciting and informative session in what is now very much a kind of our new norm, which is the Zoom. So I kind of say buckle up. We've got some great speakers and looking forward to say being of interest and say have some fun over the next hour and a half. What we actually have in store is two sessions for you, and we've kind of broken this down into two sections which we think make sense and hopefully flow really well together. So we have one session, the first one, which I'm going to host with three industry experts, and it's very much around the kind of the voice of the customer. So we have three individuals who work for the leading relocation management companies, who obviously have an extensive client base. Used to in our world of corporate housing, they're used to having clients who have 5-star expectations, and also clients who have much more modest expectations. So I think the insight that hopefully we'll get from them will be of real value and interest. We then have a second session, which a colleague of mine is going to host, Jess Blackmore, and that's a kind of a sprint around the globe, again with some very well seasoned. That doesn't mean they're old, it just means they're very knowledgeable experts, and they're going to focus on regions which they're currently based in, and Jess can do a little bit more about that. As far as some kind of basic kind of rules of the road for this session, we will be taking questions and would very much like everybody to use the app and to post them. And then we have another colleague who is going to be kind of calling those out at the end of each session. So we want to try and make it as interactive as possible for you all, so please feel free to throw out any question. If we can't get to all of them, then we will do our best afterwards to get the appropriate feedback from the appropriate expert. So just in terms of a few quick kind of intros, my name's Andrew Scott, and I'm kind of here today very much wearing my EURA hat, and have had the benefit of being on the EURA board for a number of years. So I'm kind of happy to bring forward this session, which is something that I know EURA and myself and colleagues are very passionate about. In terms of the panel that I'm going to kind of work with, we have three leading experts. So I would kind of like to introduce them. We have Sarah Jackson from Plus Relocation. We have Andreas von Struckowitz from Wycott, and John O'Connell from Server. And what I'd like to do before we kind of dive in with the first question, where we'll ask you all to turn up the volume so you can fully hear exactly what the conversation is going to be, is if Sarah can just give us an intro on herself, and then Andreas, and then John.
Sure. Hi everyone, my name's Sarah Jackson. I am the Director of Global Supply Chain, Plus Relocation. I've been with Plus for around 18 months. Which
or
has
if
been very
everyone else can, I'm struggling to hear you there, Sarah.
Is that any better?
I can hear well.
That's just me, or?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Sarah, I can hear you okay on this side.
Okay, great. I'll carry on then.
Anybody else here, Sarah? Andreas? Or?
I can.
Yep, might be you, Andrew. Okay, I'll continue then. if that's okay. Great. Okay, so I've been with Plus Relocation for the past 18 months, which has been an eventful 18 months to say the least. But prior to that, for the 20 years previous, I've also been in the relocation industry, primarily with RMCs and for a time in the Big Four, but with a brief stint in immigration services, which was also very interesting. So that's me. I'll hand over to Andreas.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. Andreas Strachwitz, Sarah and I, we used to work for the same organization many years ago. I'm with Workforce Mobility. I'm Vice President for EMEA. My focus is business development. Been in the industry for just over 20 years and originally came from logistics. That was my original background. One of the things that we've talked about one of the things that we've discovered, or what we saw resilience over the last 6 or 8 months, is some of the things that I've noticed about myself, and that is the reason why I love my job, and that is to see people, to interact with my peers, with my prospects, with my clients, with my colleagues. I know, who would have thought that we'd be actually quite desperate to go to a conference again? You know, granted, we don't have to meet every 2 weeks or so to update us on our new achievements in the industry, but I'm speaking with colleagues. I think I'm not alone. I'd probably be willing to pay money for a middle seat in a plane at the moment, after having been at home for so many months now. But maybe one of the surprises I want to just point out is I am seriously surprised how well working from home for an entire organization actually works. I was always very critical. Maybe I was too old-fashioned in my head, but I'm really positively surprised how this actually works. So that's me. John?
Thanks, Andreas. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John O'Connell. I'm SVP for Global Supply Chain with Serva. Been with the organization about 10 years and actually coming up on 22 years in the industry. Not quite sure how that happened. Very excited to talk with everybody today. What's interesting is that the topic of corporate housing is probably the most widely discussed topic among our client base these days. So it's a critical topic for us. Again, really glad to dive into that today. Building a bit on Andreas's comment about resilience, certainly it's been a very, very interesting year for everyone. I think what has really impressed me is the manner in which all of our global suppliers have responded to what's happened over the last several months. We've actually seen quality scores rise during the pandemic, and we've seen an incredible response from our customers in terms of how our suppliers are supporting them during this time. So that's been really, really exciting and impressive to me. In addition, we've just seen our suppliers done an amazing job of weathering the storm. So grateful to everyone for that, because ultimately, obviously, benefits our clients. So despite the fact that it's been an incredibly difficult year, overall, I think people have managed through it as effectively as possible, and in fact, in some cases, have actually outperformed prior years.
Okay. Can I just ask, can people put their hands up the panel if you can hear me, because unfortunately I can't hear anyone. So that's just the challenges of Zoom, etc. So whilst we try and kind of fix that, I will kind of fire off with maybe my first question, which was going to come to you, John, and you know, whilst we're kind of all working our way through you know, the challenges that COVID has brought across the globe, and not wanting to make this session, you know, just COVID related, but obviously as it's kind of very much shaping, you know, our futures at the moment to a certain extent, and definitely the shapes of our businesses. I'm just wondering what you're kind of hearing from you know, your customers with regards to, you know, duty of care. What are they kind of expecting? What are they asking? Just really kind of hear your thoughts.
Sure, absolutely. So expectations in that area certainly have changed since the outbreak of COVID. Some of the responses or questions have been probably relatively highly expected. Things like how are corporate housing units being sanitized? What is being done to ensure that that there is safety in terms of the places that people will be staying? But it really is, it is going beyond that. Clients are seeking overall advice about how to care for their employees. They're asking questions that they haven't historically asked of an RMC or of a corporate housing company in terms of what is the best protocol and what should they be doing. There is a very heavy reliance on information, I think, these days. We're also seeing some changes in terms of how they're looking for us to keep their employees safe. We've seen cases where they're asking for customized services, transporting individuals to their corporate housing upon arrival, making sure that they're safe and in a clean environment during the transportation, and often contactless check-in to make sure that their employees are cared for. We're seeing cases as well where in countries where quarantine is required upon arrival, they're looking for the RMC and the corporate housing company to work together and sort of pre-outfit a corporate housing unit so that everything is there and available to the employee and they don't need to leave upon arrival. They also want to make sure that we've taken care of other needs associated with making sure that an individual is able to work from their corporate housing stay. So items like, really effective Wi-Fi coverage, in some cases smart TVs, post boxes, things of that nature that haven't necessarily historically popped up are becoming very prevalent and all considered sort of part of the package upon arrival. So quite a lot occurring in the current state.
I'm kind of still having difficulty, so I can see that you've stopped talking, and I understand that everyone else can hear you, and I think you can kind of hear me. I couldn't just also throw that one to Sarah whilst I just try and move and see if I can get, I think it's a signal issue, which is quite frustrating. So if I could let you take the floor for a moment, Sarah, while I try and find a resolution here.
Absolutely, new normal now. Yes, I think just to add to what John said, absolutely, I think that that duty of care, but also the flexibility in the things different, things will change even in the course of a stay in temporary housing, the situation in the location that they're in, for example, or their company's association with, the travel bans, for example, that happen sort of early on, then the flexibility that's been needed, certainly in our corporate housing supply chain, has been more even than we've needed in the past. So in addition to the accountability and the flexibility and the safety and all those other things that we're asking for, I think because things can change so quickly, I think we've needed to be very flexible. And I've been pleased to say that all of our partners have been able to step up to that, which has been fantastic.
Thanks, Sarah. So this is Jess Blackmore. I'm just jumping in with Andrew's having his technical problems there. Thank you for sharing. What would you think is possibly the greatest challenge you're seeing, Andreas?
Well, the greatest challenge I see at the moment, hold on, am I? No, I'm fine, is getting people to go. It's obviously all these things that Sarah and John just mentioned, I think are absolutely critical things that I've heard as well. Something very new, that the ability to be able to work full time from a temporary accommodation to be in be a place where you can be while you're quarantining. It's sure, but at the end of the day, the clients that I speak to and the prospects that I speak to is people don't want to go. People want to stay at home until things have calmed down, and that is then at the end of the day the magic word is successful vaccine. That will change, and I think until then we will all have a difficult time to persuade people, because if I would think I have a family, if I would be offered an assignment anywhere basically at the times when you've got rising numbers at the moment, I'd be extremely hesitant to probably facing my family telling me, what the hell are you thinking?
It certainly is very trying for everybody when they're thinking about moving at an already stressful time, isn't it? Sorry, because I'm working off Andrew's notes here, so please forgive me. Would it be possible to ask you each, when we're looking at suppliers, would there be something better they can communicate and understand? What would you want your suppliers to do? Maybe I could start with you, John.
Sure. We've had a lot of requests from clients for the suppliers to communicate very, very current conditions in the various local markets. And of course, as Sarah indicated earlier, it's challenging because things have evolved so significantly and have evolved rapidly in many cases. So certainly that piece about really helping clients understand the local market. The other thing that is also critical is, again, Sarah hit on it, the piece about flexibility. We're seeing cases where they request to extend stays based on changing circumstances, things of that nature. So obviously that's a really, really difficult thing to build in when you're talking about units being booked or not booked, but that's certainly a common request we're seeing today as well.
Yeah, and I think the flexibility is key. We've had so many cancel and had to restart and rebook. It's certainly that sort of fluidity we need to work on. Sarah, what would you think would be the one thing you would want suppliers to say or do?
I think there's a couple of things really. One would be sort of the clarity of the process, the check-in process. I think that often as these moves are often, to Andreas's point, much more emotive, that what we have is that, you know, people with families who aren't necessarily comfortable moving, then even sort of small niggles about the property, for example, are so much bigger because it's part of a more worrying move. So I think that just an understanding, and again, that communication of what you've done, where it is, and obviously we would back that up from an RMC standpoint, but just really overemphasizing what's been done, what's there. And also, you know, the pre-check-in procedures suddenly become so much more important now, almost as much as they would be in permanent accommodation, because where things come up, where issues come up, then, you know, as an organization providing this service, you need to be able to really be incredibly clear on what you've done and what's there and what was there, and so that we can help make the employee feel comfortable being there. I think also there's a level of transparency which isn't necessarily just to do with COVID, but obviously becomes more of an issue at times, is that just being able to show the value, whereas we're all working with supply chains, there are obviously layers of cost that come into this, and that in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, as long as the layers of cost are also layers of value, so we can provide this consistency, so we can have a confidence, even if you're using somebody sort of 2 or 3 layers down your supply chain, that's fine, as long as what it is a value that we're all adding to this process. So I think that's been a big part of it, particularly because as well, the way that the industry has been throughout this, and probably will continue to go, is that a lot of the moves that are now happening are business critical moves or high level moves or VIP moves, because people are really drilling down on what it is that the people that they want to move and who's willing to go. So again, that kind of adds to the potentially to the noise that happens on smaller issues and the emotions of the people involved.
Gosh, yeah, so I'm sort of putting out of there, we're sort of looking at flexibility, clarity, communication. I know I'm always saying to my team, it's never wrong to over communicate, and totally, you know, and the transparency of how we're all working together, and, you know, when we're providing that sort of comfort to these people that are being moved, and quite often displaced spouse there as well, you know, it's always adding that bit of comfort, isn't it? Andreas, is there anything you would like to sort of add to those sort of key points?
Well, not much, just maybe one thing, and that is, you know, the decision of taking an assignment or a transfer won't depend on necessarily the corporate housing, the temporary accommodation alone. But what I can see is what the temporary accommodation world is already doing, I think, really well, is communicating how, for instance, they take duty of care seriously, and how much extra measures they are taking to sanitize apartments and things like that. I think to continue doing that, I think, is really important, because from an RMC point of view, if our consultants who are one-to-one in conversations with the transferee have that knowledge, excuse me, it will help them to ease the minds of the transferees, and I think that's something that one of our main jobs as well. And if the temporary accommodation world continues doing that as they are, I think that's really great. I think it's important.
Yeah. Thank you for that, guys. I understand, I've just seen a message pop up in front of me that they're trying to get Andrew back online and with us, so please just bear with me, everybody. One of the questions Andrew's got here, and it's sort of interesting to hear your views on it. Are you seeing any hotspots? Where are people heading to? You know, what are your trends? Who would like to kick that one off? Should we stay with you, Andreas?
Sure. you know, not being myself in supply chain, and that's knowing, you know, having my knowledge from talking to my colleagues, of course, and talking to transferees, I think the markets that are slowly but surely, well, we say recovering, because what we hear yesterday is tomorrow is really yesterday's news, because things change so quickly. But I did see a slight recovery in Asia Pacific. I did see a slight recovery in continental Europe. But looking at today and yesterday and the day before, that all can change dramatically, because the infection numbers are going up like there's no tomorrow in some countries, up to 20,000 new infections a day. That is concerning, and that is concerning for, again, the organizations who then decide, well, let's hold off a bit more. So I personally don't see any region today that is clearly recovering significantly that is worth mentioning at the moment.
Thank you. Sarah, are you seeing any sort of hotspots for moves or any new trends coming up?
I think from our perspective, the hotspots are probably where they were pre-COVID, but just with the slight caveat that, you know, who's opening up first, where it's possible to go. And I think that we're seeing that those places that are easy to get to, the quarantine on entry is not necessarily a big thing, depending on the circumstances around it. You know, that can be managed. But yeah, as I say, the hotspots do seem to be as they were before. We're hearing a lot of discussion about possible other locations, but not necessarily movement there yet.
Okay. Well, dare I mention the dreaded B word? Are we starting to see people thinking about Brexit and the group moves? I'll pass that on to John.
So we are hearing some pieces about Brexit. We have one or two major clients who remain focused on that, without a doubt. In terms of broader hotspots, I think it's perhaps a bit dictated by our specific client base, but if we sort of try to set aside COVID for the moment, which of course is very hard to do, in general, we see that India and China remain very important destinations for our clients. So that brings about some interesting circumstances in terms of availability of housing and local conditions and things. So those two markets, pre-COVID and I believe post-COVID, will remain very, very important for us. I actually read an interesting article last week indicating that, you know, one of the emerging areas in the months ahead, or perhaps next couple of years, will actually be sub-Saharan Africa. We have not seen that personally or within our client base, but I found it interesting that there's a suggestion that will be a future trend of something we'll see.
Okay, that's certainly interesting. I'm sure Dean will be keen to talk to you all about India and China, who is one of our specialists who'll be on the next panel. So maybe people could think of some questions for him in readiness for the next session. Andrew's just sent me a text to say, am I happy to keep going? I'm not sure how to answer that one. But, I just wanted to take a moment to sort of pause and just say, you know, we've talked about the trends we're seeing and hotspots and what you'd like to see our suppliers communicate and understand better, and, you know, and our trends of what we're seeing. One of the things we did mention, I think it was you, Andreas, was like the duty of care. What do you think is going to be expected as that sort of new norm moving forward? I wondered if we could just sort of go back and maybe get the other panelists' thoughts on that as well. John, would that be okay just to carry on with you?
Sure, absolutely. I do think the sanitation requirements that have come into play recently are going to probably remain in effect longer term. We've certainly heard about this not only in the corporate housing space, but even in the permanent housing space in certain parts of the world. So I think that is going to become much more the norm. Along with that, I think the comments earlier around transparency are going to remain extremely relevant. Clients really want to understand the full picture. This has been an incredibly difficult time, obviously, and it's never been more important to build trust with clients and help them understand that we're all looking out for their customers, looking out for their best interests, and that transparency and communication overall will remain key as part of that. In terms of some of the other services, I hope we reach a state where it's not as critical to sort of have the specialized transportation and some of the other things that have come into play in the short term. But ultimately, of course, time will tell.
Okay. Andrew, are you okay to speak and jump in? I hope you heard my kind of subtle quick roundup of the questions I've already asked. Can you hear us?
I mean, I can hear you. Yeah, and thanks for doing a sterling job as always, Jess, and to everyone else. So yeah, somewhat frustrating, but I'm trying to kind of keep calm. So I'm not exactly sure which questions and which topics we've kind of covered, but I mean, maybe just kind of leading on from one of the things that you were just saying then, John, with regards to, what is potentially going to be, a new challenge in terms of location. And I kind of maybe not read the same article, but I've seen something recently that was kind of talking to the same, how sub-Saharan is certainly going to be seen as a real kind of growth market. But I'm just wondering whether there's any other kind of challenges on the horizon, with regards to this, area within the market. Not so much sub-Saharan, I just mean in general, on the temporary housing side of things, whether you're seeing or hearing from your customers. So I don't know whether Sarah, if you've got any kind of thoughts or comments, anything you've seen or heard.
Yeah, and I think potentially not in any way sort of related to the past 12 months, but I think every time we see sort of new locations, there's particularly when they're either remote locations or just not necessarily high volume for this industry, then I think the key for us has always been to work with our supply chain as early as we possibly can. That could be the week before, given the usual state of things, but where it's not, getting as much information and as much research done as we can, and obviously we rely very heavily on the people in location, whether that's a slightly unusual state in America or whether that's sub-Saharan Africa. All of those things we would rely on the expertise, and we would work hard with our suppliers on the ground too.
Anything, Andreas, that you've seen, on the horizon, or comments from clients?
Well, one of the things, I mean, maybe just another comment to the hotspot, something that I haven't read the article about sub-Saharan Africa, but what I have been talking about to some people is these locations that I'm offering up, and I forgot the name of it now, the special kind of assignment that you can go to the Baltics or some Caribbean countries where they will allow you to go on temporary assignments with a tax benefit, and also Canada being a location where we have at least heard interest. It hasn't really happened yet that individuals who are originally supposed to be going to North America, to the United States even, now moving to go to Canada. So we've had many more requests than we normally do. It hasn't actually turned into bookings yet through our channels, but at least there is interest. One of the things that I've been hearing when it comes to what are the requirements that our client base is looking for in our choice of temporary accommodation providers is definitely the duty of care. That goes without saying. But another thing is, and that is financial stability. We've seen a few organizations in that sector exit the market over the last, not since COVID, let's be honest, it was before that as well, which happened very suddenly and brought us all in a great amount of challenges, if you might want to call it that way, where then apartments weren't being paid from the companies that exited the market, which is something that our clients have been made aware of. They haven't really spoken about that before, but have been made aware over the last year and a half or so, and are asking us to pay specific attention to these, to the financial stability of these single organizations that we work with.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting and valid comment, isn't it? Given you know, kind of what's happening out in the marketplace. And
I mean, you know, COVID didn't help. I mean, there are lots of organizations that were that have been struggling, and COVID just didn't really help, of course.
Yeah. And it's, you know, for those of us kind of involved in it, you know, on a day-to-day basis, is, you know, how do you identify, how do you work with those providers to kind of help them as much as you can, yet not, you know, put your clients in any risk. I'm just wondering, John, is that anything that you've seen, or, you know, do you have concerns about, you know, with regards to your supply chain?
So I would absolutely agree with what Andrea shared. Early on, we actually received a lot of inquiries from our clients about stability. Our suppliers, in particular in this corporate housing space, remaining in business, and also just, are they open? When we looked at, you know, when the outbreak hit, for example, Spain really hard, we had some activity there, and we had a client just wondering, are the facilities going to be open and available? What's going to happen with guests who are in the facilities today? Are they going to be able to remain there? Because of course, the idea of potentially having to move somebody in the midst of what was going on was extremely concerning. We've heard fewer inquiries just recently about sort of the financial stability, but I have no doubt those inquiries will continue. They just were particularly prevalent very, very early on in the virus. So I think that piece is critical. I think the other piece that sort of moving a bit off the COVID topic for a moment, the other thing we're hearing a lot of is just a need to really clearly communicate how things can be and are different in certain markets. Perhaps sort of going back to the hotspot conversation and thinking of perhaps emerging markets, really educating the clients on what type of accommodation is available, you know, what they can expect, because there is absolutely a very, very strong consideration among the client base of expecting and wanting sort of the same standards to be available regardless of where in the world somebody's moving. So that's a very common theme right now that we're hearing from clients as well.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering whether, and I don't know whether Jess may have touched on this, and if she did, please tell me, everyone. But have you seen any kind of more focus from customers on, you know, the utilization of a temporary housing solution as opposed to a hotel, you know, potentially for business travel, given, as we know, a lot of hotels are shut around the world, and I'm just wondering whether, you know, that's been a conversation piece as well. Sorry, John, I'm looking at you on the screen.
So we are, you know, we haven't had as many inquiries specific to business travel, but in general, we have seen a tendency, even in the temporary housing space, in the short term, for more of a focus on apart hotels. So more of a hotel type facility, of course, but having those services and facilities, having the ability, at least a kitchenette or something where you can feel more at home than you would in a standard hotel room. I think there are a couple of reasons for it. In general, that piece about consistency, when they have larger numbers come into to a facility. We actually saw this arise a bit with potential Brexit activity last year, even before COVID broke out. But I think the other piece is just the ability to convey confidence that a building or a facility like that has been really cleaned and sanitized, and there's security protocols in place, things of that nature.
No, that's interesting, and good news for those hotel operators. And I know there's a lot of them out there that you know, are still investing heavily in growing that sector of the market. So I've kind of just got one kind of final question before we maybe go to see if there's any questions. And that's around the A word this time, not the B word, which is Airbnb. And I know it was something that was, you know, had been very much a hot topic within the industry. And I'm just kind of wondering, you know, and this is, you know, I'll come to you first, Sarah, if that's okay, but I will ask all of you. You know, is there still kind of conversation with your customers with regards to, is that a viable solution? Is it something they you know, are keen for you to investigate more, or just it'd be interesting for, I think, all of us just to hear what you know, what conversations are happening. So
it does kind of sort of split the judges somewhat. I think that there are some clients that we have, and you know, it may just be based on our client base, but some clients that are very keen on looking at other solutions like that, and others that wouldn't even consider it. And I think that we've been quite clear on the differences, and almost not even particularly seeing the two things as a substitute necessarily, because they are such different services. So the short answer is yes. It is something that we've been asked to investigate, and it is something that our clients continue to be interested in, but not everybody. I think it's certainly not for everyone.
okay. And Andreas, is that anything that's, you know, kind of across your conversation piece?
Well, it's gone particularly quiet during well, talk about COVID. It's gone particularly quiet around COVID because organizations that I've spoken to just don't have the trust in Airbnb. And the other thing, of course, is, I mean, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, Airbnb wasn't in particularly good shape financially. You followed the news there, and I actually, you know, people talking to me just on a private basis saying, you know, we don't really want to book anything Airbnb, because who knows if we pay and do we ever get our money back if they fold. I mean, I didn't particularly think it was that bad, but I think at the current moment it'll come back, because as a result of this entire situation that we're in, I think we're all in agreement that organizations are now going to look at costs again, like they always do, but maybe in a bit more intense way, and going to try to find cost savings, because organizations will want to stay mobile, but will want to try to be even more cost effective than they maybe have been before. And so I think it will come back, but at the moment it's not a topic at all.
And John, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are definitely seeing less inquiries about Airbnb, excuse me, in the current COVID environment. I think it ties heavily back to all of our discussions on duty of care, just the potential uncertainty about how individual properties are or maybe looked after during COVID. So it is it is something that at the moment customers are trending away from. I agree that it's not gone, but I don't think it's, well, I'm certain, in fact, that we're just not hearing about it as much in the moment. I think the point that Andreas hit on related to cost is a really important one, because that is something we're hearing so much about from our clients, particularly as their own companies struggle with the financial impact of COVID. We're, however, seeing cost come into play in some different ways. So rather than saying, you know, save some money by going to an Airbnb, it's coming about more in terms of policy decisions and controls. So for example, are there ways we can shorten the amount of time in corporate housing by having the corporate housing provider and the DSP work really effectively together, get them into the permanent housing more quickly where they'll be safe? So we're seeing, again, cost as a critical consideration, but not specifically playing out into that Airbnb space at the moment.
Okay, yeah, that's a really interesting comment. Thank you. And I'm kind of conscious of the time, and I know we have a number of other panelists who are champing at the bit to participate, but I'm just wondering if we've had any questions. So, and I know we have a fantastic adjudicator who's been watching on the app to see if anything's been posted. So, Susie, have we had any questions?
Yep, there is a couple. This one says, great question on Airbnb. And of course, some clients will be interested in exploring different options. Given Andreas's comments, what is the RMC appetite to take on the level of risk with Airbnb?
Okay. John, do you want to jump at that one first, and then we'll come to you, Andreas?
Sure. From our perspective, if you know, we absolutely try to show flexibility and work with our clients when they have a strong desire to do something like that. Our focus is really about on educating them about the risk and coming to an agreement with the client on where the risk lies in a particular situation. So I think the having very clear guidelines on who is responsible and having that laid out in advance and making sure the client is really aware of what they're taking on if they choose to go with essentially an Airbnb type solution rather than a traditional corporate housing solution. That's critical from our perspective.
Great, thank you. Andreas, any further comments?
Difficult for me to say. I don't know whether, I mean, you can't rule it out, but the problem is on an RMC world, if your client insists on Airbnb and you, let's just paint a picture here, and you of course oblige and you do it, and then if anything goes wrong, it's the RMC's fault. So there's a I think there's a limited appetite to take responsibility for the coordination on behalf of the client of a third party supply chain that you can't really control, because it's just working with a corporate housing provider. As one of my colleagues always to say, it's the one throat to choke, which is quite a nice thing to do. Whereas if you go to Airbnb, you've got 100 landlords, and I think that's what corporate housing should be doing, and not us. We shouldn't be managing 100 Airbnbs. So it's a difficult one, and I don't have an answer for you, really. But those are just some thoughts about it.
Yeah, no, I value that. I'm also conscious of the time. So I'm going to kind of pause on any other questions. What we will try and do, maybe at the end, is come back to some. So if the three of you are able to hang on, that would be fantastic. So the plan now is that we will kind of drop off the screen, and Jess and her panelists will come on. So I just want to kind of thank Jess for stepping in. And a number of you may know Jess won an industry award for, it's a people award for, I mean, a number of things, but one, just being a fantastic person, and also one who's got very broad shoulders. So thank you for stepping in and helping out. Well, I had a very stressful 10 minutes then, Jess. I will hand over to you, and we look forward to the next 30 minutes or so.
Thank you, Andrew. And yeah, that was a baptism of fire for me. And I'm really sorry, I understand my video wasn't on when I did jump in. I just want to check that everybody can hear me, and my panel are all there. Superb, thank you very much, guys. Yeah, that was a bit of a shock. So here we go. So this is my proper introduction. And I'd like to welcome you all to my very first maiden flight, although it doesn't feel so maiden now. As Andrew said, I am Jess Blackmore. I'm a Director of Global Account Management for Dwell Works Living. And I will be your pilot today as we do a whistle-stop tour of the globe, looking at corporate housing resilience in action around the world. We'll be visiting the trends we're now seeing and managing the constant regulations, what's emerging now and what's on the horizon. I'm delighted to be joined by some of our industry's best. Cara Lingle, VP of Agency Business for Bridge Street, joining us from the USA. So good morning, Cara. Tom Mertens, CEO for National Corporate Housing, flying the flag for EMEA. And Dina Lorenz, VP of Account Management for Dwellworks, staying up late tonight to talk everything APAC from Hong Kong. Please feel free to send them your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as possible at the end of the session. So while I make the final checks and turn on the fasten your seatbelt sign, please can I ask our panel to tell them a little bit more about themselves and their part of the world. Cara, can I please start with you?
Sure, thanks, Jess. So I have been in the hospitality industry for just over 20 years now, in an array of different management positions, from operations to sales and marketing, and even recently technology. So I've been with Bridge Street for 5 years, and I currently manage our agency business. So we have our own portfolio of properties in the UK, and we work through our supply chain for a strategic sourcing business model, which is the piece of the business that I manage currently. And I also have been working more recently in recent years with the business to develop our configurable technology solution that we provide to our customers. So, and I do believe, Jess, I was tasked to bring one interesting fact from the Americas region to the conversation. So my fact for everybody today is that the Americas have been populated for over 15,000 years. And so it's quite clear that if we've made it through that, that we are going to make it through this. So, okay.
Yes, Akara, thank you. Tom.
Thanks, Jess. So I am Tom Meertens. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for National Corporate Housing. I look after everything corporate housing and our solutions business that happens outside of the US. So we have offices in London, Singapore, and the Philippines, and also offices that service LATAM in Canada. I've been in the industry for a few years now, originally from Australia. I moved to the UK 7 years ago and have been in the service department industry since, and most recently the last 2 years with NCH. It's been an exciting time to be part of NCH. We've been growing aggressively through acquisition and through organically as we continue our footprint across the globe. I wasn't as prepared as Cara, and I don't have a fun fact on the UK, unfortunately. So I apologize. A fun fact on Australia. Do you know what? I don't even have that. Joe, I thought it was a fun fact on ourselves, and my fun fact was that much like many of the people that our relocation partners are servicing at the moment, with the uncertainty of these times and just not knowing what the future will hold, I was recently stuck in Australia for 4.5 months. So my 2-week holiday turned into a 4.5 month, couldn't get a flight out of the country. So I'm recently back in the UK.
Having had the trouble of trying to work UK hours on the other side of the globe. So hats off to you, Tom. That's an amazing achievement. Dima, could I pass on to you?
Thank you. Yeah, I was just about to say, Tom, that it's worse places to be stuck than Australia, I think. But hi, everybody. My name is Dima Lorenz. I'm the VP for Account Management Services in the APAC region for Dwellworks. I've been now in the sort of Greater China region for coming up to almost 20 years now. Started a business back in 2005, which was a real estate brokerage business, then developed into a DS business, and that was then acquired by Dwellworks 2 years back now. Since then, I've been getting more and more involved on the corporate housing front, and I'm now looking after the client services range for both destination services and corporate housing within Dwellworks here in Asia. We've got 4 offices in the region, Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and cover a total of 70 countries, obviously, with corporate housing solutions. Yeah, and excited to be here. I also didn't bring a fun fact, but just wanted to say, Jess, that was very impressive to jump in, and yeah, certainly a fun start to a virtual conference. No, but that was very well handled.
Thanks, Dima. Yeah, certainly a baptism of fire. We shall swiftly move on to the questions now, and I know these ones slightly better than Andrew's. We really want to have a look at sort of trends and what we're all seeing lately. So, Cara, if it's okay to start with you, because I know you're able to sort of pull some facts out and figures and give us a good starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jess. In terms of trends, one of the things that I looked at was really, where from a revenue source our business has been coming. And since April, really the onset of the pandemic, nearly 50% of the revenue that we've seen in the region in Americas has actually come from existing business. So in-house guests that either have an inability to travel or a lack of desire maybe to travel back to wherever they came from. In addition to that, also on an average, 3 out of our 5 inquiries for new business or new movement have come direct from the relocation and the mobility side of our business versus corporate or business travel. So our co-panelists, the RMC companies and people that we work with direct that manage mobility programs, those are the types of organizations that really have the lion's share, the majority of the moves and demand that we've seen. In general, the booking windows in our region and even globally, even globally, I think that booking window has shrunk significantly. Where we were seeing an average booking to arrival window of 30 to 14 days, Now we're seeing, less than 5, and sometimes even just a handful, 1 or 2 days prior to arrival. There's so much more, I don't want to say red tape because it's all a necessity, it's an evil necessity, but there's so much more to do now to prepare for this type of a move in an environment like this that we're all dealing with. And we know we're only one piece of that puzzle. And so a lot of times, that window has become very, very small and challenging to manage. In addition, I think for the Americas region, again, in general, when you look at some of the CDC travel recommendations that have come out recently, there are less than a handful, less than 5 countries in all of the Americas that are not currently rated high risk for travel. Some of my counterparts on the panel today, they have other countries that are not, in their regions that are not high risk, right? They're moderate to low. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges that we've seen in the Americas for obviously travel. But on the flip side of that, I think one of the positives in terms of trending is that the geography and the overall landscape of the countries in this region actually play a really positive impact on the domestic travel capabilities. So for example, travelers who are forced to stay within borders, but are within countries like Canada and the US and Brazil, they have a means to travel domestically and even, not having to use mass transit or public transit, right? So we do still see some movement in that regard. And that has uplifted and held a little bit stronger for a travel economy, if you will, I think. While there are regulations, between countries, between one to another, I think that movement has certainly played a key factor in what we're seeing in this region, and not as steep of a decline in movement as we have in other regions like EMEA, for example. So I don't know if that's something similar that Dima and Tom have seen, but.
Would you like to pick that one up, guys? Tom?
Sure. And I think Karen touches on a great point, about extensions and flexibilities, and obviously some great data that, that you've been able to share. And we certainly were in the same place that, when COVID hit and, that first global peak went up, and it was really pandemonium because no one really knew how to deal with what was being thrown at them. We saw a lot of extensions because people thought, well, do you know what, it's safer to be where I am and just stay put and kind of see what happens rather than travel to maybe where my home location or my next location was. So we saw a lot of extensions in the beginning. In terms of trends now for our region, so in EMEA, John mentioned something really critical before about, when then the conversation was talking about hotels versus service departments, and that apart hotel concept. So people now, especially with quarantine restrictions in many places across continental Europe and the UK now, it's critically important for the guests to have somewhere that they can stay with home-like facilities, but also the comforts to not be able to leave. So we're seeing a more uptick for sort of apart hotels that might have F&B, have some sort of concierge services, so they can still cook and clean, but if they can't be bothered, they can still order a meal to their room and have someone do their laundry and all of that sort of stuff. But what we're doing to kind of counteract some of those trends is as well, with people coming in and those extra quarantine needs, is making sure we're offering things like shopping and pre-arrival with the partners that we work with. So that's there because the traveler has a lot of uncertainty when they're uprooting from place A to place B. They might not necessarily be wanting to go there. So we like to partner with the people that we're working with and say, how do we make that process as smooth as possible? But I think confidence is rising slightly in the EMEA region, although the rates of increase in most places are increasing quite drastically now. And we're seeing second waves. So we may see, a slight decline again, but there seems to be a confidence that people know how to manage themselves in a COVID environment. They know how to travel safely. There's a lot of CDC and WHO guidelines in how to do that. So yeah, so there is some more confidence coming back. Certainly not at the rates that we'd hope, but it's there.
Yeah, I think we all just want it all to go away. Dima,
Yeah,
you're a bit ahead of us, aren't you? So
well, slightly, but similar to what Tom said. I mean, we're certainly seeing some recovery in selected markets within Asia. A couple of observations that we saw. I mean, first of all, this concept again, service department versus hotels. I think there is a certain flight to quality at present that we're witnessing for some of the assignees, that if they are able to make their own choices, that there seems to be less interested in risk or unique choices, boutique choices that they may have been wanting to explore beforehand, but now there seems to be far more comfort in sort of the safety and predictable of particular well-branded service departments. So that may be a positive aspect for some of the larger chains out, particularly out here in APAC, that are operating. And it does make sense, right, from a consumer perspective, that if you are already forced to go into assignment, and Andreas in the earlier session pointed out very, very rightly that there's actually many that don't want to go right now, that would actually prefer to stay at home. But if you're forced with that decision that you have to go for business right now, that you do seek the comfort of a very well branded chain over perhaps some of the smaller and cheaper options out there. Another aspect, perhaps on the topic of duty of care, what surprised us, how quickly that was really adapted out in the Asia region. And maybe some of that comes back to having had a previous learning curve on due to SARS and MERS, where we've been able to adapt some of these measures already. But anything from deep cleaning to industrial strength disinfectant to everybody wearing masks to hand sanitizer at every corner in the service department, those measures were really implemented from one day to the other, in particular, sort of if you look at China, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And I think, again, God knows how long that will continue afterwards, but it was just amazing the speed that was put to the market with. And then perhaps the last part, and again, echoing very much what Tom said, we've seen certainly an increase in requests for additional add-on services, whether there was airport pickups or whether it was add-on settling in services that could be provided either after the quarantine or during a normal stay, and also then obviously ongoing ordering support, whether it was for groceries or for stationery. And that's something that was actually quite interesting, because it's a trend that I think may have some merit also further down in the future, of this combination of adding more destination services to standard corporate housing solutions.
Thanks ever so much, Dima. Yeah, I think it's interesting. We're all sort of seeing the same thoughts all around the world, and everyone's kind of making the same decisions on what they need and want for their travellers. Obviously, we're seeing constant regulation changes. Yeah, and it seems, as we said, it changes on a day to day. It's exhausting, and sometimes it's not right, and especially in the UK, we're told one thing is totally different. So, Tom, how are you helping your suppliers sort of keep up with these constant changes, and how are you communicating that to our travellers and guests?
Well, if anyone can keep up with Boris, they're doing well. I think we get confused about what we are and aren't allowed to do in the UK. But we are, we do keep a good handle on it as we can. Fortunately, we work with amazing partners in many different industry sectors that, we share information. And one of the key things now is, we're kind of all in this together, and we're here to support each other. And so whereas, maybe in days gone by, people were a little bit closed with information and thinking, well, I've got this great piece of insight in what's going to happen in this country, or I heard this, and maybe I won't share that because I could kind of use that to my advantage. We see now that there's a lot of collaboration between us and the people that we work with and the partners that we work with. And with that, we're able to glean so much information with what, is either kind of factually happening or what may be predicted to be happening in certain countries in terms of regulations. They do change, and they do change very quickly. And because of that, we need flexibility in what we do. With cancellations, with extended terms, with shortening terms, and we certainly provide that down, and so do all of our partners. That willingness to say, hey, we know that tomorrow could change. You know, quarantine could come in, and for the arriving assignee, you know, 14 days quarantine might be a game changer. So we stay ahead of what we can find out online, but also what we find out from our regional partners. You know, in terms of that's on the kind of regionally what's happening with each country in terms of their quarantine regulations. But on the flip side of that, you know, we also need to make sure that we stay ahead of the constantly changing environment of traveler and guest safety as well. Because I think if you look back to March, we as an industry or as a country, we were kind of scrambling and saying, well, how do we make sure everyone's safe in the corporate housing element of what they do? And I think now as an industry and as a company, we're at a place where, you know, we feel that we do meet, you know, regulations and that we're now able to enforce those regulations against the partners that we work with. So whether that's, you know, cleaning guidelines, whether it's how, you know, our expectations that guests are met, from key delivery to, you know, disinfecting remote controls to, you know, to all of those sorts of things. So we also need to make sure not only the kind of governmental guidelines and requirements, but also making sure that we're staying ahead of those requirements and doing more than what that minimum bar is for traveler safety, and making sure that that's consistent throughout everyone that we work with in our region. It kind of has to be one size fits all. So you know, one country might not be as hot on certain elements that we may deem are quite critical, but as providers and as providers of a solution, we have to push that forward.
Yeah, I can certainly echo your thoughts there, obviously being EMEA based as well. Cara, how are you finding it managing it in the States and LATAM and Canada? There's sort of constant change and keeping up with it all.
You know, it's I think Tom kind of hit the nail on the head. It's all about the resources. You know, we have a pretty robust list of resources that we go to on a daily basis, and we talk about them internally as teams, and we educate our teammates and the people who are, you know, on the front lines, our agents that talk to the potential guests or the consultants from the relocation management companies. I mean, that's hypercritical to us staying, you know, ahead of the curve, if you will, or at least one step behind it. We absolutely have, you know, seen a variety of different enhanced communications throughout the organization. And I think, you know, Tom also said communicating with our customers. And even yesterday, I was listening to one of the other sessions, the care and cost session. And I think one of the panelists said, you know, that there was this sort of shift in this transition where as a supplier partner or vendor partner, we are accustomed to obviously reaching out to our clients, but we're seeing that outreach being reciprocated equally as much, because as much as we want information from them, they need information from us. And that collaborative environment that's kind of come out of all of this has really been, it's quite a positive thing as a result of all of this, right? We all realize we're in it together, and we kind of need that. From our business's perspective, we've also done a few things as well. We obviously get a lot of data, we all do. And we examine our data on a regular basis. So I think from the guest requirement side or the needs, what people are asking for, we look at this on a regular basis, and we talk about, you know, finding suppliers and ensuring that we have suppliers in our supply chain that offer the types of things like outdoor space or home office environments or parking. Parking is one of the things that, you know, it's just huge now on the horizon, right? Because people are not taking transit. We've been also very involved in speaking to a lot of our top supplier partners. So we recently participated in a survey with over 100 of our suppliers in our major supply chain globally. And, you know, we're talking to them about, are they increasing time between guests and apartments? Are they seeking any certification or training programs for their staff? What types of enhanced protocols and processes do they have in place? And we're preparing, you know, to share that market information out, you know, to our customers and to the supply chain in general. So everybody kind of stays informed. But I think one of the most important things that we can do too, and I touched on this a little, but we've been focusing a lot at our organization in leveraging our technology. we look at the ways in which we communicate with our supply chain and the types of things that we're asking of them. And we're starting to take that response on each request individual basis for every quote that we provide to a guest or every quote that we provide to a consultant. And we feed them that information direct from our supply chain. So if there is a window between the last guest checkout, they have transparency to it. If that supplier has some sort of an accreditation or some sort of a certification relative to COVID, that guest will know that that property has made that extra step. So we're trying to provide a little bit more information at the time that we quote out the options to the buyers and to the consultants, so that it does become more transparent and there's more confidence in what they're choosing.
Okay. Dima, have you got anything to add? Cool.
Yeah, that's it. That's the last point is, I think, a really interesting one. And I think we all agree that sort of keeping up with the news and the regulations and the constant changing regulations has been sort of one of the most difficult and most time-consuming tasks over the last month. And I think one thing that it came down to is that it certainly also increased the consultant's time quite dramatically when working on a particular file. I mean, the amount of extra touch points, the amount of extra questions that are asked for each inquiry are enormous. So as beforehand, we've all been in the business of finding the best property for the best rate. We now have this sort of add-on responsibility and this add-on task that we need to go, that the consultants need to go through when handling the inquiries of reconfirming arrival restrictions, double checking and asking on whether transferees have gone through quarantine, whether they come from a high risk area. So all of that just is added to the, unfortunately, to the workload that consultants have. And I'm sure everybody in this sort of frontline has experienced the same thing, that the actual number of bookings has gone down over the last couple of months, but the teams are just as busy. And much of that comes down to this continuous update on information. So one thing we've done on our side fairly early on, we started sort of with updates coming out of China, and that were then implemented for other countries. I think we had a little bit of an advantage just because we were able to pull a little bit more research also from visa and immigration requirements and DS services. And then started creating essentially a news hub where we're trying to feed information from all of the countries that we're servicing into a centralized position that would then help our consultants and our booking team when they were answering these inquiries to give up-to-date information, because individual research about this was just taking ages. So it's certainly something that I think once the pandemic is over and once we have got either a vaccine or easier treatment options, that's certainly here one thing that none of us will miss is this extra research that has to be conducted pretty much on an ad hoc basis.
It's certainly interesting, the sort of conversation we heard from the earlier panelists about wanting that transparency and communication, and we're all doing it day in, day out, and I'm hoping that's our music to our RMC colleagues' ears at the moment. And
again, I'm not complaining, but it's just the reality of the situation right now, that there are just a phenomenal amount of extra information that needs to be provided, whereas before that it was just a straightforward inquiry.
Yeah, I've always found this job that it got my geography to come up to a higher level, and now sort of quickly understanding COVID rules as we're moving around the world. Yeah. What can I say for that day? It changes. You're quickly Googling it and hoping you're right. What I want to do is let's sort of look forward a bit. So, Dima, can I start with you? What are you seeing as emerging markets? Obviously, we've heard from the other panel about sort of China and India. So I wonder if you had any comments on that before we move on to the other panelists.
Yeah, emerging is a little bit of a difficult word, because I mean, usually emerging we always link back to sort of economic growth and hotspots, particularly in the Asian market. And currently, if you look at sort of where our bookings are going and where the confirmed bookings and the inquiries are going, it's not so much deemed upon how the economic activity of that particular destination, but more, does it allow travelers in, and what are the particular quarantine requirements, and are service apartments allowed for quarantine stay? I mean, all in, we've certainly seen an uptake in APAC in the last 2 months, which is great. But it was certainly, there's been some changes to obviously the more interesting destination that we had in 2019 were certainly now not, or currently not as popular due to the pandemic. But again, it all comes down to the particular arrival restrictions, and those obviously change fairly frequently and very fast. I mean, currently, sort of within APAC, we actually see a surprising amount of volume for Hong Kong, which is strange because Hong Kong actually does have very strict arrival restrictions, but then it allows selected or certain service apartments to be used for quarantine stays. So we've seen an uptake in booking of those. Japan, China certainly as well. China, pretty much the first tier locations that you would expect, Shanghai, Beijing, and a little bit of Shenzhen and Guangzhou. Not so much for second and third tier cities. We've seen a lot less appetite unless it was driven by one particular client that had a larger project. And now obviously, since about a month, we have an ease of travel restrictions for China, which means that there is a certain boom for well, I don't want to call it a boom, a certain uptake on inquiries for China in particular. Thailand was very strong, and surprisingly, we had also a number of inquiries and bookings for Australia, but that was actually mainly due to repatriations, unfortunately, if I may say. I mean, Australia obviously had very strict, or has very strict arrival requirements, essentially not allowing any non-Australians back into the country, but we had a number of clients that were working on repatriations going back into that particular market. Singapore, that used to be, or is always one of our top destinations in APAC, was actually very quiet over the last months, but I think there's going to be some changes coming up there in terms of allowing executive and business travel again. So hopefully that will see an uptake. India was actually not very active for us at all. And again, surprising, I mean, it's been in 2019 one of our most popular destinations, but we've seen there a noticeable drop in both inquiries as well as booking. So that's a snapshot as it is right now, but honestly speaking, a month from now, it could look very different depending on who opens up first and who decides to create travel bubbles within the APAC economies. That obviously will bring a lot of dynamic as well.
Thanks, Dima. Clara, what are you seeing sort of emerging in your region?
Yeah, you know, there's kind of pockets, right? In the US, I think that there's this overwhelming discussion right now as it relates to are people, you know, mass exiting major cities like New York and San Fran, right? And I think recent research and information that's out there has kind of dispelled some of those myths. People are not, but there are others that believe that there's a huge, you know, migration post-COVID that still maybe could be on the horizon, right? And as a result of that too, I think travelers are more comfortable going to other states like Florida, Las Vegas. We've seen uptick. North Carolina absolutely is probably one of the biggest on the East Coast, you know, just bustling markets, multiple little cities here and there. From the north, you know, in Canada, Vancouver and Toronto have always been huge, you know, markets for us in terms of demand, but we've also seen smaller pockets going into Montreal, Calgary. So there are other markets that kind of coincide with some of the real estate growth that was going on before COVID and now is still consistent, that, you know, Canada is not exactly quiet. And in South America, really, you know, Brazil and Mexico are the two biggest out of all of the countries in that region, at least, you know, numbers wise for us. I think historically that's been the case and it'll continue to be that way. But I also think that there are other countries like Argentina, Colombia, and even Chile that, you know, they're on the horizon. Their economies pre-COVID were growing. And I think that, you know, as we start to emerge out of this, you could see some additional movement into those areas as well.
Okay. Thank you. Tom, I'd love for you to say for any emerging markets here in EMEA, but also what are you seeing as the journey forward? What's on our horizon to bring us back to the theme?
So, you know, I think Sarah put it really well in the panel before, and so did Dima and Kara there. You know, emerging is such a difficult word right now. It is more just demand and where are people allowed to travel to? And again, Dima put it really well in what countries are people allowed to quarantine in service departments. And yeah, so we're seeing, you know, Sarah mentioned it before, we're seeing that demand grow where historically there'd been generally a lot of demand because it might have been a business hub for Europe, and generally there's a lot of large corporations there, so some of those corporations are starting to move, but there's nowhere that's kind of like sprung up as, hey, this is like the hotspot now. Yeah, but so what are the next steps forward? So, you know, kind of thinking about the future now and our pathway out of COVID, and I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know when that will end. But I think there's a couple of things that, you know, as operators and as partners in this space that we need to really focus on, and that's supporting each other. You know, I mentioned before about sharing information, so that open and honesty, you know, with what's going on. We need to keep focusing on guest safety and duty of care. You know, I think we've gotten really good at that now as an industry, you know, duty of care and guest safety, and kind of more is more, you know, more touch points, more understanding the guest requirements, you know, more kind of listening. And I think that will carry on now. So a far less kind of transactional service, but more, you know, more listening and more hand holding. I think we will continue to see lower rates in a lot of the world for a while to come, because there is a lot of financial pressure on operators out there. We've seen a lot of operators unfortunately have to kind of alter paths because of this downturn. It's meant that they can't continue operating. So we need to support those that we can, but we also need to be mindful of those that maybe are in a difficult place, because we also don't want to be placing our guests somewhere that they might not be able to stay for the length of their need. That's about it. I think that's our path out of there. Just, you know, helping each other, keeping the duty of care message strong, hand-holding our assignees through the process, you know, and the relocation lifestyle cycle. This corporate housing element is huge. You know, they land into a country and there they are at the front door of their first 30, 40, 60 night stay. And it's always got to be perfect. But now more than ever, it's got to be more than perfect. You know, it's got to be safe. It's got to be secure. And that's where our focus has to be.
Thanks, Tom. Would Dima or Kara like to add anything to Tom's statement there, or should we move to questions? Because I'm sort of aware we've got some left over there. Something you'd like to add?
Yeah, maybe just a quick comment, and I see it similar to Tom, that there are actually potentially a couple of positive things that are coming out of this for the corporate housing industry. I think one of the trends that we will hopefully see is that there is slightly less travel, but for longer periods, which again, I mean, the sort of typical, let's go to Singapore for that particular meeting and fly back the next morning. Obviously, due to the prices that we will all be facing for quite some time to come for air tickets, but also the overall travel process, that is unlikely to take place. So what will happen is most likely you pen up your trip to another city or to another location for a longer period. You wait a little bit longer, but then stay for longer. And that again is positive for corporate housing, whereas if you just stayed for a night, you may be tempted to just book the hotel by yourself. Whereas if you're staying for 2 weeks, there is obviously a call for maybe staying at a service department and taking more advantage of the corporate housing services that your company is offering. So I think that could be a positive add-on. Also, perhaps the perception that corporate housing is deemed somewhat safer by travelers. It's more private, there's less traffic, there's more controlled access than in a hotel, and sort of also with a typically lower cost per night, there could again be more factors that get people to service departments versus sort of the classical hotel chain. So obviously, I may be a little bit over optimistic behind that I tend to be, but hopefully there may be one or two positive things that are coming out of this from the crisis, at least some sort of silver lining.
Yeah, always good to focus on the positive. Cara.
Yeah, just quickly, I think one of the things that I wrote down just to mention was, there's a virtual familiarity. This has created for so many people a virtual familiarity in so many different ways. And I think we'll continue to see that push the envelope in terms of what we do, not only to positively impact guest experience, but also, how our business and our suppliers evolve. And I think I would hope that this really forces the hand of much of what I historically think has been deemed a very fragmented supply network to kind of come together and find and embrace more ways to integrate and make supply accessible through technology and through integration. And I think too, this is one thing that was talked about in the previous panel with the RMCs. Many people think that shared economy and corporate housing are separate, and obviously we do. But I think from the outside world looking in, we sometimes tend to be put in the same bucket, and especially speaking from the Americas region, where the regulations on length of stay and all of the legislation that has come out in the last 5 years, decade, has really prohibited corporate housing from being able to do some of the services that they would normally have been doing because of some of those regulations. My hope is that the boom and the rise of corporate housing as a demand accommodation type will help us differentiate ourselves from shared economy and in some way become more accessible. And again, that duty of care piece and the vetting processes that we partake, that becomes more of a known for our industry and the service we provide.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, everybody. Let's just switch over now, see if Susie's got any super questions for us, any of the three here or the group before. Susie, can I switch to you?
Yes, there's a lot of great questions coming in, so thank you everybody for posting these on the app. This one goes over to your panel here, Jess. How are you validating compliance on health and safety measures?
Ooh, who was that one? Yeah, Tom, you look the smiliest there.
I'm happy to start because it's certainly a loaded one, but I can kind of speak from what we're doing. For everyone that works in our network, they agree to a minimum set of standards or requirements, and they sign quite a hefty partner service agreement. And in that agreement, there is a list of what those minimum requirements are. So from health and safety, it could be from fire blankets to smoke alarms to lit stairwells and that sort of thing. But now what we've had to do is add an extra addendum around those COVID cleanliness guidelines. And so we didn't go too extreme to the point of you need to wipe the door handle 17 times in a day, but more like what is that minimum requirement to make sure that we can ensure that everyone meets that. And the way of managing that in a world where we also are not traveling as much as we can, so we can't get out to all of our suppliers and see them all the time, is to not only have them sign and expressly agree that they agree to these terms, and then they become our tier one. They are our suppliers that have agreed and to those minimum standards. Is also ensuring that they've said that they've done it, is then following it up with the guests through multiple touch points throughout their stay. That did they experience what we had told them they would experience? Were they comfortable when they arrived? Did they feel that these guidelines were followed? And it's not using the guest as, I suppose, a test in this case, but it's more just reaffirming what people have agreed to us.
Cara, Dima, would you like to add anything? No?
Yeah, I think, I echo everything that Tom said. I think, the supplier agreements, having standard protocols in place, and some of the smaller suppliers that we work with don't necessarily, from the jump start, don't have those protocols. And so to Tom's point, we provide them to them to ensure that they, you know, are in alignment with our expectations. And I think that continued evolution of communicating what those expectations are, especially as they are very dynamic and they continue to change, you know, that's the best thing that we can do at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all heading down the same path on this one. So I'm quite aware of time. So Susie, is there any other questions that you have there?
Yes, actually, I have one for the RMC panel, if we can ask that. As it relates to the industry segment, does the RMC panel see any industries moving from their client portfolios more than others? So kind of looking at what industries are moving more than others. And that's to the RMC panel.
Should we toss that one to John first?
Sure, happy to respond. So
Thanks,
we
John.
are seeing, in general, I would say, a bit more movement among the tech industry than other industries, but it certainly does still vary by country, or excuse me, by company and by country. So it's not universal by any means, but in general, tech has been fairly active.
Thanks, John.
Absolutely.
All right, anything to add from your side, what you've seen?
I could say that what we see is the pharmaceutical industry is still moving, still trying to move, and sometimes being a bit too ambitious for their own good, because they're trying to push moves into locations that clearly are not ready to be receiving guests. And funnily enough, on the UK domestic market, we see movement more than we've expected. It's not great, but it's more than we expected. Yeah, probably those two industries. Then obviously one of the industries that's still active, and those are the fast-moving consumer products, who are, you know, especially the ones that are in hygiene, in the hygiene sector, where we do see still a lot of movement.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else, Susie? I know we've got literally 2 minutes, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. Any other questions?
Yeah, only about 10. So I don't know if we're going to hit them all right now. We will keep them. And if anyone else wants to add any more, please do, because we can make sure that we can cover them at the big symposium this summer. Or perhaps we'll have a briefing between now and then to address these questions. If we could do one last one towards our supplier panel. In terms of families, have you seen some or any start to move? And particularly with the pressure points on temp housing, Wi-Fi needs for kids, home learning, and online schooling?
Well, Dima, do you want to take that one? I'll make a start.
I mean, in terms of family moves, we've seen a lot less than we would have hoped to. Obviously, we've seen repatriations, people who were stuck abroad who had to go back to their home countries with the family. But aside from that, I think these kind of movements are currently put on hold as much as possible. Is simply not so much, I think, because of the quarantine stay, but I can say this in particular for the China market or the Hong Kong market. There's a lot of uncertainty about the overall arrival process and what happens during the entire COVID testing period, whether you're separated from your family, from your children. There've been a couple of sort of almost scary stories that are going around. So I think families are currently trying to not move if that's possible. And the movement that we have seen has been a lot more couples and singles, obviously.
Tom or Cara, would you have any more comment on that?
I just hit on Dima. I think you're very similar in our region.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd comment myself if I'm allowed to. I know certainly we've chatted to Dima within his region when we've had a few families move with repatriations, and they said about Wi-Fi, and it's sort of been a case of saying to our suppliers that may do an enhanced Wi-Fi package. It's kind of a case of, look, come on guys, you're going to roll that in because we do need to do it. And it is again about talking and negotiating and that transparency with everyone, and that seems to be definitely helping on the homeschooling and the working from home and somebody watching hours of YouTube or something. So that's sort of my wee comment on that one. I'm quite aware of time, so I just want to thank my panel for your time and your valuable input. I think themes-wise, I'm loving how everything's sort of marrying up about sort of everyone being consultative, and we're all working in conjunction with each other, and the transparency. And I think what's creating our resilience as an industry is our ability to work together and share and be a team. So I will hand back to Andrew to wrap up. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, no, thank you, and for those very kind of smart and wise words, which kind of just really leads me to thank my panel and you know, in particular John and Cara for getting up incredibly early, and I know Dima on your panel for staying up much later than he might have otherwise. And I think just going forward, I mean, as I said at the beginning, this is the second you know, dedicated corporate housing event that we put on with Eura, and we'd really kind of value some thoughts and feedback. You know, one of the things that Tom had mentioned was about, you know, collaboration, which is very much kind of the ethos behind Eura. So, and we're all kind of finding that's just a nicer and a better way of working if we can do that. So hopefully today has been helpful and useful and fun. Wasn't for me for 10 minutes, but you know, that's just one of those things. But going forward, really value some feedback, because we'd like to think there could be some value in doing some further follow-ups, you know, picking some other particular subjects and getting some of our expert panelists back to maybe talk again to us all. So thank you for everyone who's attended, and again in particular for all the panelists, and have a good rest of your day, night, morning, whatever it is, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.